Welcome to Nuances, Beyond First Impressions with the Asian Diaspora.
I'm Ariadna Milla, a Filipino-American from a small town on the southern border in Texas.
I'm Sherilyn Lee, a new American with Chinese Mauritian roots.
Together, we wanted to create a safe space where everyone feels welcome to learn more about the AAPI community.
We hope that through the personal stories we'll hear, we'll all get a glimpse of the humanity behind the stereotypes, how we have so much in common in some ways and so little in other ways.
This is the podcast where you can get the answers to the questions you've been too embarrassed to ask or didn't know you even should ask.
In addition to featured guest interviews, we will also highlight community wins, uplifting news stories, great role models from the community, as well as works generated by the community.
If you would like to be on the show or would like to nominate a guest, please send us a DM on Instagram at NuancesPod.
Now, since this is our inaugural episode, I thought it would be a great idea to define what AAPI means, because I think a lot of people might have heard the acronym, but maybe are not very familiar.
Yeah, so AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Other terms used include Asian Pacific American, or APA, or Asian Pacific Islander, or API.
The U.S. Department of Labor Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs defined Asian Pacific Islanders as a person with origins in East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, or the Pacific Islands.
This area includes, for example, China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Samoa, Thailand, and Vietnam, and in South Asia, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan.
Now, what do you think constitutes AAPI? Like for you, what does AAPI mean?
I think I'm still struggling with the definition, or I haven't fully defined it for myself. I consider myself AAPI. I think anybody who self-identifies as AAPI, I would consider them AAPI.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. It feels like the boundaries are a little fuzzy, and as long as you feel like you're AAPI, I'm going to respect that.
Yeah.
The second A is new for me. I'm newly American, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole concept and how I fit into this new country I'm in. I thought today, since it's our first episode, we would give our listeners a little bit of our background. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background, maybe a little bit about your upbringing and why that has led you to this podcast?
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines, and then I've lived here my entire life. I have been here since I was less than a year old. I came to the US when I was just a few months old and grew up here. I grew up in a border town on the southern border. So it was kind of an interesting mix because I was not from the US. I was in the US, but the town I grew up with had its own culture. It was very Latin influenced because it was on the border. I think I saw a lot of the similarities. In some ways, I think I was lucky because it wasn't such a huge culture shock from Filipino culture to Mexican culture. There's a lot of similarities. My family found a lot of commonalities with the people in that town, with our neighbors and stuff. And it was smaller at the time. It's grown a lot since then, but we had Filipino friends and there was a Filipino community in that town too. So I grew up there. I went to college in Waco, Texas at Baylor, which that was a culture shock because I get there and I was always a minority, but I met a lot of Caucasian people who had never heard of foods that were so common to me. I spent 4 years there. I think my journey to understanding where I fit in terms of being an Asian American and what that looks like, it took a while because I wasn't even conscious. I knew that I felt othered, but I didn't know to put that term othered on it until I had grown up a little and I was in college and I was realizing wow, this, and then when I look back on things in my experience where I felt left out or excluded for some reason, looking back, I'm like, oh, I think I can understand why now. And before I just thought people were mean and I was just really uncool. And now I'm realizing there was kind of a race aspect to that too. So I remember when we first started talking after one of the listening sessions.
Yeah.
And I think we had a FaceTime call and we were just talking and I was like, oh my God, this was really fun. And then we did our co-write with the AAPI song. And yeah, I guess the more we talked about our experiences, I was like, oh, this would be really fun to talk more about. And then we had the idea of the podcast. So yeah.
What do you hope that the podcast can do for you, but also what you hope to bring to your community?
Yeah, I think for me, this would be a really fun opportunity. I have lots of other AAPI friends. And it's so interesting that we've never directly talked to each other about this one huge thing that we have in common. Of all the things that we have in common, being AAPI is the biggest. And we've never talked about our experiences with that and the times we felt othered and just the experiences being Asian American. And so I think it's therapeutic in a way for me and for the people that we'll be talking to, that will actually get to have all this out in the open and talk about our experiences, a lot of which we went through together that we never talked about. Mm-hmm. As far as what I want to bring to the community, I think just a safe, positive, uplifting space where we can talk about our experiences, where we can learn, and where we can also help to educate.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I have some rapid fire questions for you, and we're probably going to do this for all the guests who come on the show. So it's 5 questions we're going to ask you, and you just give the answer, no explanations.
Okay.
So what was the first language that you learned?
English.
What language did you speak with your parents?
50-50 English Tagalog.
What's an Asian food that you'll never get tired of?
Oof. Gosh. How rapid is this? I have to think about it. Silog.
And for people who don't know what that is, can you explain what it is?
Yeah, it's a Filipino dish. It's pork marinated in salt, sugar, some other stuff, garlic, lots of garlic. In the Philippines, you can never put enough garlic on anything. So I dump a ton of garlic. If it tells me 2 cloves, I'm going to put 6. So tocino is the pork, but when you add an egg, you get the OG. I don't know why. So it's tosilog when it's the pork with the egg.
All right. I have not had that, so that's going to have to be on my list of things to try.
I'll send you a recipe.
All right. What is the most annoying question non-Asian people have asked you?
What are you?
What are you? I've not done that. Okay. What is a stereotype about white people that actually is true for you?
So during the fall, I always get a pumpkin spice latte, and I love taking the pumpkin patch photos.
Yep. I think that qualifies.
Christian Girl Autumn.
All right. Well, thank you for answering our rapid fire question.
Yeah. So I guess now it's my turn to interview you. Tell us about yourself, your background, why this podcast?
Okay. I have a very complicated past. I was born in Canada to Mauritian parents who are of Chinese descent. If you don't know what Mauritius is an island, tiny little island, kind of like Hawaii, but in the southern hemisphere in the Indian Ocean. Growing up in Mauritius, the only East Asian looking people are usually of Chinese descent. So when I was growing up there, I identified as Chinese Mauritian. And I never had to question whether I was Mauritian or not. It was accepted that I was Mauritian and Chinese. It's only after I moved to North America that I realized that, wait, am I Chinese? I realized that my experience of Chinese culture was different from the experience of other students who were coming from China or other places. And it was also different from those who grew up in the US and Canada. I was in Canada for 7 years and I moved to California. And I've been learning more about the Asian American experience and the discrimination and feeling othered. And I've encountered some of those questions and weird things that I never experienced in my childhood, even though I was a minority. Mm-hmm. So to me, I also see a lot of nuance in how sometimes allies and progressive people have a little bit of a judgmental attitude when it comes to racism. And I know the intent is good, but I also empathize with the people who maybe they're just not exposed to people like us. And they just never had the opportunity to get to meet one of us and see us as a human, as opposed to just the stereotypes that they've seen on TV or in the media or whatever. So I wanted to open up the conversation, and I'm hoping as we learn about people's stories, everybody listening will realize that, hey, these are just average people, just like us. They have their quirks, they have good things about them and bad things about them. I just want to bring back the humanity in the debate, because I feel like a lot of times it's attacks and judgments and expectations that you should be using the correct terms and the correct words, asking it the right way. And I understand that. And I, agree with a lot of it, but I also want to make space for people who want to do better, but don't even know where to start because there's just so many judgments flying around. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that this will be a positive space where everybody who leaves the conversation feels seen, feels like they were able to tell their experience authentically, but also be uplifted by it. I don't want anybody to leave the conversation feeling depressed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. With people getting canceled these days, I think it makes people afraid to ask questions.
Yeah. And I want this to be a space where there's no dumb questions. As long as you ask a question in a respectful way, trolls, we're not going to respond to, obviously. But if somebody has a genuine question and they just don't know where to ask, we're happy to answer it. Just, don't be a jerk.
Yeah, I know, right? Don't ask, what are you?
Yeah, that's kind of mean. I'm not a thing.
Okay, so I've got some rapid fire questions for you as well.
Okay.
All right. Let's do this. So what was the first language you learned?
I had two, Creole and English.
Nice. What language do you speak with your parents?
Usually Creole, unless there's English speakers around.
Okay. What is an Asian food that you'll never get tired of?
Okay, this might be super stereotypical Asian, but rice. I can eat rice every day. And I ate rice almost every day in my childhood, and I never get tired of it.
Yeah. Oh my God. If I have a meal that doesn't have rice, it doesn't feel like a complete meal. Okay. What is a stereotype about your culture that is not true or does not apply to you?
I'm not meek.
Definitely not. What is a stereotype about your culture that is actually true for you?
I was pretty good at math at some point in my life.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up pretty quickly for the first episode. And wait, that didn't.
We definitely need bloopers.
Yeah. Welcome to the Nuances podcast, where the blooper reel is longer than the actual pod. So one of the other things that we're going to try to do in this podcast is highlight news and anything positive that's going on in the community, but also in the spirit of getting to know all the people who make up AAPI and celebrating the diversity. I just wanted to point out that Eid starts on Sunday, so I would like to wish Eid Mubarak to everybody who might be celebrating. And I think that's a wrap for our first episode.
Yay! We did it.
Yes. So we will be posting an episode every week during the AAPI Heritage Month. And if you have anybody you would like to hear on the podcast, please DM us at Nuances Pod on Instagram. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, and if you're an artist, if you're a musician and you would like music featured on this podcast, we always want to amplify and feature Asian creatives. So feel free to DM us on Instagram at Nuances Pod.
Yeah, and not just musicians, any other creator out there, if you have something coming up and you want us to promote it, we're happy to do that. Send us a DM. Would be nice if you followed too. And I think that's a wrap. We'll talk to you next week.
See you next time.
Bye.